Good evening, everyone. We're gonna get started in about a minute. Allow a few more people to log in. All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Looks like for the most part, people are in, and I'm sure people will join us in a few. Um, and so I'll get rolling with the program, and they'll join in as they are able to log in and be let in by our host. Um, My name is Liddell Adams. I am the co-chair of YCAT Coalition Youth and Community Action Team in Virginia Beach, and we would like to welcome you to the first youth conversation series, Let's Talk About Marijuana. This evening, we will have an open conversation about marijuana and how it affects our community. We have three panelists this evening that will speak on their expertise in this area. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes to present with questions after all three have presented. If you have questions, please ask them in the Q&A section and we will ask them towards the end. Tonight, we are offering volunteer hours. So if you do need volunteer hours, just type your name in now. And then before we end out the session, type your name again in the Q&A section. And that way we can know who needs the volunteer hours or wants the volunteer hours. And we'll send you a certificate through email in that manner. You do not have to have your cameras on. The speakers will have their cameras on once they're going to begin speaking. So let's introduce our awesome speakers for this evening. First speaker we have for the evening will be Rob. Rob has over 4 years of clean and sober time from drugs and alcohol. He's been finishing his bachelor's degree and living life happy, joyous, and free. Thank you, Rob, for being here with us tonight. Our next speaker, we have Dr. Avery. Jim Avery is a visiting assistant professor of medicine at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He is board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary, hospice, and palliative medicine, and is a certified nursing home medical director. Dr. Avery was awarded the Lillian B. Wald Award for his hospice and palliative care work in New York City and the Roger C. Bone Bone Award for national leadership in end-of-life care. Dr. Avery was named one of the 50 most influential physician executives by Modern Physician magazine and was also nominated as one of the 100 most influential people in healthcare by Modern Healthcare magazine. In 2019, Dr. Avery published his acclaimed children's book, How's the Water Girls? And last year, Amazon released his book, Marijuana, an honest look at the world's most misunderstood weed, and is being considered for a National Book Award. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Avery, as well. Lastly, we have Detective DM Reed. He knows these streets better than any of us. He was born and raised in Virginia Beach. He joined the Virginia Beach Police Department in 2007. Then he joined the Special Investigations Bureau in 2015 as a narcotics detective. Prior to joining the department, he served 8 years of active duty in the U.S. Air Force and is currently a reservist stationed at Langley Air Force Base. He received his bachelor's degree in criminal justice from American Military University and a master's degree in criminal justice with a concentration in public administration from Liberty University. Thank you all for taking your time to speak with us. We first will have Rob, and following Rob will be Dr. Avery and then Detective Reed. You're up, Rob.
Okay. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So I am Rob, marijuana addict, alcoholic, and compulsive gambler. Um, so first off, let's start a little towards the beginning. So I was born in upstate New York, um, and both of my parents were military. And so we moved a bunch. Um, Spent most of my life going back and forth from Germany to Indiana during the war, Iraq War. They would both get deployed. I'd have to go live with grandma. And so I started to become very lonely and very, what is the word, depressed, and, just a loner and really detached. And so we finally moved to Washington State, where they both worked at Joint Base Lewis McChord, the long one. And at that point, one would go to Iraq, come home, the other one would go. For several years, it was like that. And I was always so lonely, didn't have many friends, and, got to high school and started making some friends. Um, and then, at that point, I was like, I'll never do drugs or alcohol. I grew up with an parents, um, alcoholic parents, and I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not going to be my life. And I think it was my sophomore year of high school. I was a few months after turning 16. My dog died that I had grown up with. And that was the, start of, I don't want to feel anything. And so I picked up some weed and didn't really get high the first time. But, it started to escalate further and further. It would be, I'll only do this on the weekends, when I don't have school. And then next thing I know, I'm at midnight smoking some weed with my partner, and I have school in like 6 hours. And it was like, screw it. And then a year later, I was a junior. Me and that person broke up pretty badly. It was not a healthy relationship. It was very toxic. And I started using even more. And I started getting into alcohol and other drugs. But I'd always come back to the weed no matter what. That was my favorite. I'll be honest, there was some fun times. I'll be honest, there was some fun. But, fast forward a few years to 2016, I had no friends, barely went to my college classes. And then I lost my uncle to a drug overdose. And that sent me down the deep end. Because when I was smoking weed, it's like, oh, I found my people in the stoners. I really didn't. Most of them didn't even like me. I just had the money to get the weed. And then I lost my uncle. A political campaign I had been working for ended. And I just didn't know what to do with myself. Dropped out of school, and went back to Indiana for the funeral. Spent a whole month there, and then I was pretty dry while I was there. I didn't have anything, and so I stole some alcohol from my grandpa. He was at work, and then filled it back up with water. I learned that from my mom. Just kidding, but it was just so depressing. And then fast forward another year, I got arrested during a mental health crisis in May of 2017. The officer was trying to get me to tell him that I wanted to commit suicide. But I didn't say that, and so I spent the weekend in jail. And that was fun. Just kidding. Um, I'm, and then, I got out of jail. My lawyer's like, okay, you need to stay sober and go to rehab. And I got a plea deal, went to rehab, and they're like, okay, stay sober for a year. I get out of rehab. The first thing I did was like, I want my weed. I'm not doing this. Um, and so I used again like 3 times in a month, and then finally went, okay, I have court in a few days. I'm going to stop using and go to Marijuana Anonymous. So I found out about an outpatient, and I am so glad I did. My first meeting, there was someone that was just 2 years older than me. I was 20 when I came to MA, and he was 22. I asked him to be my sponsor, and we sat in his car after the meeting for over an hour. He had bad breath. I remember that. I wanted out of the car. But that I just told him everything. I just let everything out of my mind that I'd been holding in for years and years. And I felt so much better. I worked, and then we started working the steps. And I think we made it through the first 3 pretty quickly. And I stalled, switched sponsors, and it's taken me about 4 years to get through all my steps. But I got through them. And I remember when I first came, it was like week 3. He took me to the meeting and then to a workshop and then a 3-hour drive to the other side of the state to outreach a AA Young Persons Conference. I didn't get home till the next day. I got home at like 5 a.m. and my parents didn't text me like, "Where were you?" They weren't worried. They trusted me, and I had the most fun ever. I was completely sober, and I went back to college, started working on my associates, and then was like, I'm done with this, and transferred to a university. And I'm almost done with my bachelor's. And I've worked really hard, and I wouldn't be able to do it if I wasn't sober. I have so many friends in my life now. I don't want to run from my feelings. I've found my people. I only have one friend that I used to live with that I still that I still talk to. And she's literally my best friend. And the journey I've been on has just been great. It hasn't been easy, I'll be honest. There's been depression, there's been all kinds of things. And I got diagnosed as bipolar while I was in rehab. They switched up my meds, and I've been on the same one since rehab, and I've been so much better. So yeah, if you're thinking you may be a marijuana addict, come to a meeting, give it a try. If you're not ready, you're not ready. Come when you are. Um, I came when I was ready, and I'm glad I did. And I think that's it for me. I thank you for letting me be a speaker today, and I look forward to helping with some questions later.
Thank you, Rob, for sharing your experiences with us. Next up, we have Dr. Avery, and Kathleen will be posting your slides in a second.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, Rob. That was a very personal discussion, one that I really enjoyed. I'm going to be looking at it from a different standpoint. I'm an assistant visiting professor at the University of Virginia, and I'm going to be looking at this from a purely medical standpoint. You heard a personal story that fits the medicine, and now you're going to be seeing the medical facts. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to tell you where I'm coming from. I don't have any personal axe to grind. I have no stake in any marijuana companies, and I've never had a family member hurt or helped by marijuana. I'm here basically just to give you the science. Next slide. So marijuana, I mean, if we just take it, it's just a plant. Some things that come from it are good. Some things that come from it can be a challenge. Some things that come from it may in fact be great medications down the road. But as you can see on the slide, hemp and marijuana, and only in one area, back in the where you see THC, are we talking about the hallucinogenic, the part of marijuana that makes you high. Next slide. The first thing to know is that the new marijuana is not the old marijuana. So if you talk to your grandfather or your father about marijuana, this is a different beast. What's happened is with powerful lights, selective breeding, they have increased the THC. That's the chemical that gets people high. It's also the one that gives them all kinds of troubles. And marijuana these days is not what it was back in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. This is not your grandpa's marijuana. Next slide. THC levels are now 10 to 30 times higher than they were in the 60s or 70s. At the same time, another chemical in the marijuana plant called CBD, you've seen ads for those, has dropped. And that used to balance off the THC. And all that means a more rapid and intense high and more health problems. It's interesting. Uruguay and Netherlands, which have very liberal drug laws, now are thinking about classifying marijuana with the THC over 15% in the same category as heroin and cocaine. Under 15% is legal in those countries. So we're seeing a whole different beast, not what we were seeing years ago. Next. I also want to emphasize that there's a powerful coalition that is fooling people. I'm just going to use that word. Powerful corporations here in Virginia and lobbyists work hard to make people think it's no risk. Politicians want tax revenue. They want money because it's a new source. There are people called radical libertarians that want no regulations or laws on anything. And then the celebrity culture. It's almost made it impossible to talk about limiting marijuana to adults because celebrities seem to view it as sort of a funny, joking, natural thing. Next slide. So this is the evidence. There are some benefits to prescription marijuana. It may help pain, spasticity, and multiple sclerosis, end-stage people with AIDS, people on chemotherapy who are having cancer, and some rare forms of childhood epilepsy. That's it. That's it. So when we talk about medical marijuana on the next slide, it actually has very, very few benefits. And in fact, people take it for many of the reasons you'll see on this slide. It does not help in any of these diseases. Doesn't help with depression, doesn't help with irritable bowel, cancer, dementia, any of those things. The research is very, very, very clear. Next slide. But there's strong evidence for complications. This is all research. Chronic bronchitis, people who are coughing and hacking, motor vehicle accidents, we'll see that in a minute, schizophrenia, mental illness, psychosis, meaning confusion, people not knowing where they are, low birth weight babies, and it also slows down brain development in teens. We know that in males, the brain doesn't fully develop till about the age 25. In females, maybe about 21 or 22. So we know it causes some problems there. Next slide. So a hospital in Pueblo, Colorado, they found that nearly half the babies tested positive for marijuana. And overall, what people said was, it's green, it's natural, it's healthy. People use it for medicine. And nothing could be further from the medical truth. Next slide. We also know that suicidal ideation, impaired learning. It's interesting. There was a man who went to Florida, actually a college student, went to Florida on spring break, had some marijuana gummy bears that somebody brought. He never had marijuana before or the gummy bears. He tried them, and next thing you know, ended up jumping off the balcony because he became paranoid. Marijuana also makes social anxiety worse, chronic lung disease worse, heart attacks, and even strokes. Next slide. And these are from medical studies. We know there's a connection between opioid use and marijuana. Once it was legalized in Colorado, opioid use doubled among teens. Also, once medical marijuana was legalized, Opioid-related deaths increased. And teens who use marijuana were more likely to use cocaine and heroin than teens who used alcohol. So there seems to be a connection, not directly, but somewhat. Next slide. So high THC, we don't have a whole lot of studies because this recent elevation in THC is relatively new. But psychosis, that means confusion. Every emergency room doctor will tell you this. People come in and they are paranoid, they're confused, they don't know what happened, they're depressed, they feel their heart racing, they're seeing things that aren't there. People have harmed themselves with suicide and they've harmed others through violent acts, including deaths, gunshots, stabbings, those kind of things, because of these high THC concentrations. Next slide. Now, all the experts, National Academy of Science, US Secretary, say no to medical marijuana. So I don't want, what you should come away from on the next slide is that nobody, the Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, they all say there's no such thing as medical marijuana. We have better drugs for every reason why medical marijuana was approved. Medical marijuana is none of these things. On the next slide. In fact, well, we'll go on to some other things. Another research shows where there's smoke, there's fire. You will never, ever see a healthy, normal doctor recommend taking a medication by smoking, by inhaling it through smoke. Now, we have respiratory inhalers that I'm a pulmonologist that we use. That's not smoke. Anytime there's smoke, it's going to affect the lungs adversely. Do you know that COVID infections are 55% higher? COVID-19, the virus, 55% higher in people who have cannabis substance use problems. That's because it affects the immune system in the lungs. Next slide. So it's simple. Most of this stuff with medical marijuana, it's profit over people. You know that 70% of marijuana dispensaries in Colorado recommended it to pregnant women despite the clear known medical facts against it. Next slide. And beware the marijuana hype. I went online, looked up cannabis, marijuana, Googled cancer, and sure enough, there were plenty of them. I just picked one where they say cannabis, marijuana cures cancer. This stuff is just not true. So beware the marijuana hype. And they look official. They even quote things that look official. It is simply not the case. Next slide. So profits over people, you can see here, headlines for profit is hot in Fortune magazine. You can see the profits that are being made. One of the biggest companies is located in Richmond, Virginia. And there's profits here to be made, just like the cigarette companies, just like the alcohol companies. They know it's bad, but profit wins over everything. Next slide. So don't be fooled by some of this stuff. Again, the Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic says no to medical marijuana. Next slide. So let's talk about recreational marijuana. That's what Rob was talking about. First of all, let's look at Colorado, who was the first state to legalize it. There are more marijuana dispensaries in Denver than Starbucks and McDonald's combined. And almost all of them are located in low-income neighborhoods. It's the disadvantaged and the poor who will suffer disproportionately. That's why we're here tonight. Next. In Colorado, 20% of people with incomes under $24,000 consume marijuana, only 11% over $50,000. Just like alcohol, gambling, lottery tickets, tobacco, people are taking advantage of folks who have had some difficult lives. I think Rob's story was very good about that. And it's all about money. And they have a saying in the marijuana industry, hook them when they're young and you might have them for life. Next slide. Let me talk about some myths now. First of all, there's no harm in smoking. This is a myth. There's no harm in smoking a joint with dinner. It's just like my parents with a glass of alcohol. Next slide. Well, what we know is that marijuana use, moderate use is rare. In other words, with alcohol, some have a little bit, some have more. And at the end, you have less people who are heavy users. It's like a curve, like a bell curve. With marijuana, it tends to be biphasic. Rob was mentioning how much he liked it. That's common. And then there are people who don't like it. There's very few people in the middle. So it's dangerous to assume you can limit your usage like many people do with alcohol. People who like it rarely get hooked. Next. Kevin Hill, a marijuana expert at Harvard, said this: most people who use marijuana either use it rarely or regularly. Few people in the middle. This is very different than alcohol, just like I explained, and he explains it in detail. Next. Myth number 2, it's not addictive. That is all over the internet. Next slide. This is the percentage of people who use a product, that's on the left-hand side, and the percentage of people who become dependent. Marijuana is the third one down, and basically about 1 out of every 11 adults will become addicted. They'll become dependent on it. Like Rob was saying, they'll be in jail for 2 years, they'll come out and they want it. They might quit for 6 months, then they come back. 1 in 11 adults and about 1 in 6 teens who use it will become addicted. That means they want it, they need it. It's not as addictive as heroin or cocaine, but it's addictive. Next slide. 1 out of every 11, there it is, 1 of every 6 teens, and about 1 out of every 3 people who use marijuana every day will meet the DSM as a criteria we use in medicine for a substance use disorder. When people say it's not addictive, do not believe them. It is simply not true medically. Next. No one has ever died from marijuana. Next. Every emergency room department in every city has seen people admitted with marijuana overdoses. Very often they come in paranoid, they come in distressed, they come in very shaky, nervous, agitated, lethargic, clumsy, fall injury, suicidal attempts, heart arrhythmias. Next. The number of suicides in which marijuana was present, you can see it skyrocketing in the US. Next. Many marijuana users, you're not going to get an overdose like you have with heroin, where people will die from using and they use Narcan to reverse it. Regular marijuana users will experience a gradual decline in their physical, social, and emotional health. People die from the marijuana-related traffic deaths. They increased 92% in Colorado in 4 years. Marijuana deaths in Colorado, and again, I keep on mentioning Colorado because it was the first state to legalize it, has increased almost every year for fatal fires, psychotic killings, even explosions. Next slide. Here's the traffic deaths. You can see it increasing. There's where it was commercialized and then legalized. Next slide. Now, brain development, I haven't mentioned this, but there's a direct link between cannabis use, loss of concentration, and memory. Jumble thinking. And what's that going to do to schoolwork? What's that going to do to college scores? Nova Scotia's early psychosis said it led to people having literally mental disease. One of the key things is our new studies in the brain, and what it shows is be careful where you find your pleasure. Your brain will then push you into those activities, whether it's sugar, whether it's marijuana or anything. This is where the issue comes in. Next. So let's conclude here. Marijuana is not just a plant. It used to be. Today's marijuana is a potent drug. Marijuana will probably have uses that will benefit mankind medically. I'm not saying marijuana is, the devil's weed or something. I think it will have some benefits, and I showed you some of the medical benefits it has for people with chemotherapy and others. Our medical experience over the past few years has shown marijuana to be more problematic medically, more of a problem, more harmful than we thought. At the same time, the public sees it as more safe, just the opposite of what the medical field is finding. And the reason for this was that coalition I talked about. It's powerful when people have money and they can control the politics and the airways and the celebrities. Next slide. The poor and disadvantaged will suffer disproportionately. Let's fool them and not fall into the tricks that happen with alcohol and gambling. Teens and young people will suffer disproportionately and have long-term effects. Profit, politics, and social media are powerful forces driving this movement. And honestly, if you ask somebody, would America be a better country if we had a marijuana dispensary on every corner on Main Street? This is my worry. This is what keeps me up at night. This is why I'm on this program. I'm worried that it will be normalized and it will be accepted. And this will have profound short-term and long-term effects on our nation's health in so many ways. Next slide. Here's my advice to you. Know the science. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. What would you tell somebody you loved, say a brother, say a sister, if you knew they were using marijuana? What would you tell them now that you've heard the science? Make friends. I love the way Rob mentioned that. Make friends with people who want the best for you. And compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Just make sure you're improving day by day, week by week, year by year. Any given day, you might have slippage, but make sure you're improving. Next slide. There's 3 books if you're interested. I put my book in the middle. You can get it on Amazon, An Honest Look at the World's Most Misunderstood Weed. Weed Incorporated on the right is about how the corporations are lying to us about it because they want the profits. The one on the left, Marijuana by Dr. Hill, he's a professor at Harvard who specializes in marijuana addiction, and that's a great book. That's it for me, and I look forward to answering questions at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Avery. Now we will have Detective Reed. You're up.
All right, good evening, everybody. Unfortunately, I can't show my beautiful face due to the fact that I still work under the undercover capacity sometimes in my office. But because of that, I can't show my face. So if somebody can put my PowerPoint up for me. This afternoon, I'm just going to talk about the legal changes to the state with marijuana and some of the things that we've seen. But Rob, thank you for your personal perspective, and Dr. Avery for the medical, because both of your perspectives I've seen as a first responder on the street daily, and see how marijuana has affected some of us in our community. Next slide. Next. All right, so basically with marijuana, before I go into the changes in the legal perspective, in my office, personally, what we do is we look for the drug dealers and not the users. We're trying to get these people who are selling these drugs and try to stop it from basically getting to the users and helping them out. From our perspective, just like what Dr. Avery have talked about and explained, we have seen from several pounds to large amounts of marijuana being shipped through FedEx, UPS, the Postal Service, from states like Colorado, like Dr. Avery said, California, the state of Washington. Not only large amounts of marijuana, edibles, and THC oils, which are smoked in the e-cigarettes now. So those are major concerns that we have within the state. Next slide. So as of July 2021 of this year, basically the state legislation has changed some of the laws with marijuana. So basically it's legal for anyone, I'll say again, over the age of 21 and over to possess simple possession of marijuana and also able to cultivate it in their homes. Next slide. So with that, some people are kind of confused with that. As an adult, 21 years or older may possess no more than an ounce of cannabis for personal use. If you look at the pictures to the right, because some individuals are not aware of how much an ounce of marijuana may be. If you look at the top, a gram may be 1 or 2 joints or put in blunts. And if you look at the bottom, an ounce is 28 grams. So you're looking at 28 to double that of marijuana you can smoke. And on the average, it depends on the user. You could smoke between 3 or 4 blunts a day. Next slide. So with the general growing of marijuana, adults 21 years or older may use marijuana in private residences. So this, however, may prohibit a person that may be renting from a person. The renter could state that in their rental agreement that they would not allow the individual to grow or smoke marijuana in that residence. But if they rent or they own and there's no stipulations to that, they can smoke marijuana in their residence. Also, 21 years or older can grow up to 4 plants per household. Now, it's not per person. So if you have multiple people staying in a house, you can't say, well, I can grow 4 plants, my brother can grow 4 plants, my mother can grow 4 plants. No, it's only 4 plants for that residence. So also, because of this new change that adults 21 and older can give as a gift up to an ounce of marijuana to a friend. So with this, some people are kind of confused with this. Giving a gift means that basically you can't get anything in return. So if I'm giving my friend an ounce, he can't be like, hey, I'll wash your car, or here, I'll give you this t-shirt. It doesn't have to be with money per se. Any gift is illegal. So basically that's selling of marijuana at that time, which is legal at this time. Next slide. So also some things to look at with the new rules. If found guilty for the first time, possessing more than an ounce is basically a civil penalty, which is $25. If you're charged with it again, or basically possess more than a pound, it could be a felony. So there are some things to remember. Also, one of the main things I want to talk about is marijuana in the smoking or having marijuana in the public is still legal. You can't go out to a public park and smoke it. It has to be at your residence. Also, you can't have it in a motor vehicle or have a passenger in a motor vehicle being driven possessing marijuana on school grounds, school buses, motor vehicle transportation, and any other public area. Also, with the changes with that, if a employer feels that they have laws still stipulate that their employees will not smoke marijuana, even though you can physically smoke it at home and grow it, it's up to the employer if they do drug tests to still consider if they want you to be an employee for them. Next slide. Another thing I want to talk about that in the previous slide with the rule with the driving or having marijuana, there are some stipulations or some concerns that we have as law enforcement because you can't have, technically in the law, you can't have marijuana in your vehicle or smoking it. But say if there's a patrolman on the street, he at a stop sign or a red light notices somebody next to them with their window down, they smell marijuana. Initially in the past, that was a initial probable cause to conduct a traffic stop. But now with that rule, it's a secondary offense. So the officer would have to find some other probable cause to stop that vehicle, speeding or something else, to stop that vehicle, and secondary offense to charge them with the possession or use of marijuana. Also at the bottom, if you look at the bottom, basically the plans to regulate the sale of marijuana is not until 2024. But the good thing with what Dr. Avery explained was with revenue and profit, in a lot of these other states, revenue of marijuana is very big. But as of right now, our state is not looking to make that legal until 2024. Next slide. So one of the things I want to talk about right now is the vapes and the edibles are basically one of the major issues that we're having with the juveniles, for the simple fact that with THC oil and vapes, a lot of times in those e-cigarettes, the smell of marijuana, normally if you know what marijuana smells like, smoking it from a joint or something, it smells really strong. But with e-cigarettes and THC oils, they could have a fruity flavor or to no scent. So a lot of times you can't smell if they're marijuana. Also with the edibles, for some parents, you should be concerned because a lot of times some of the edibles, if you look at the pictures above, a lot of those edibles look like regular snacks or sour candies, but they do have THC oil in them. Most recently, I've had an incident where a young female at one of the high schools in Virginia Beach had an overdose issue with an edible that she had purchased from another student in the high school and had complications from that. So like what Dr. Avery said, there are dangers to overdosing from marijuana use and edibles. And this is some of the things that we see on the street daily. Also to that, just like what Dr. Avery said, with marijuana, there could be other possible drugs later on down the line. Majority of the time when I've gone to an overdose with somebody that possibly may have overdose from heroin or some type of fentanyl or any other drug, majority of the time there is marijuana on that person or at their home with that other drug. So it's kind of a common denominator. If we see marijuana or we know individuals may use cocaine, majority of the time marijuana will be present with them. Next slide. So to the point, some things I want to talk about, especially for the juveniles. I know with peer pressure and with friends doing different things, I know the use of marijuana may seem cool, but there are dangers to it. I've seen it on the street. I've talked to individuals, and that could lead to other things. I've talked to juveniles and had incidents where may have started with using marijuana to 18-year-olds in high schools start using heroin. So those things could happen. And it's just some things that we need to look at in the community and our parents. So don't be scared to talk to your parents about it. If you're thinking about it, you have some concerns, you may not want to talk to anybody in law enforcement, but talk to a family or friend about it to make better decisions before actually doing it. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Detective Reed, for your presentation and all of the speakers for your presentations. Now we will have question and answers. Not sure if Kathleen or Patricia was going to read the questions. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
I think we are going to go ahead and get those pulled up in just a second. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that. I have a hard time seeing the questions come in at the same time that I'm sharing the slides. Our first question for Rob is, what would you say to someone who believes you cannot be addicted to marijuana? And have you ever heard any of your using peers say that when around them? Oh, gotcha.
Excuse me. So, would you say, what would I say to someone? Well, I'd tell them, you may not be addicted. You can, 89% of people can use. In the Marijuana Anonymous Big Book, it's quoted as 11%. Dr. Avery quoted 9% get addicted. So, 1 in 10 can use normally, can pick it up and not want to smoke more and more and more. To me, I probably wouldn't be friends with them anymore, but that's just me. And then has any of my using peers said that to me? Or heard them say that? Yes. Some of the using peers I haven't talked to in years. Some of the people I go to 3 different 12-step programs, and I've heard some people in AA say you can't be addicted to weed. I've seen some of them smoke weed, and for me, I just worry about me, and I just can't really. If I can't I can't convince them. That's fine. It's their problem. But it's about you, not them. So worry about, at least for me, I worry about me. So hopefully I answered that enough.
I think you did. And of course, I mean, you talk about such that percentage, but you don't know if you're in that percentage or not. And that's the problem, no matter what that percentage is.
And
When you
for
take
that, I would honestly look up marijuanaanonymous.com, find our 12 questions, answer them honestly. And if you answer yes to at least one of them, you may be a marijuana addict. And if you've answered yes to all of them, welcome to the program when you are ready. So that's what I did before I went to the program.
Just to jump in, one of the tricky things about marijuana is it's not like when you stop it, you have withdrawal like you see with heroin, where people are shaking and they're on the floor and they're, have really life-threatening withdrawal. What happens with marijuana is that people just feel jittery. They feel a little anxious. They feel a little, and very often they don't relate that to marijuana. In other words, they just feel, well, I'm a little anxious or I'm having a tough day. And so the natural thing for them to do is, well, marijuana takes that away. And so it's a very deceptive addiction. It's not as clear cut even as alcohol, because it tends to be rather subtle, but enough where the solution is to go back and use it, and then that goes away. So I think we have to be careful, understanding that this is not addiction like heroin. This is more subtle, and in my estimation, a little more scary because of the trickiness of it, the subtleness of it. It's more obvious when it's some other drugs.
Thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Avery. Is there such a thing as a safe way to use marijuana?
Well, I think Rob, sort of talked about that some people will use it, and we're not here to demonize marijuana. I'm here to give you the science. Some people will use it and really not have major issues with it. The problem with marijuana, though, the problem is that number one, the addiction is subtle, like we just talked about. The second is, if you're in that category that likes it, you're going to go to heavy use pretty quickly. While those who don't like it, and they only will use it at a party just to look sociable. So if you're that group, anytime you're getting pleasure from something, your brain is lighting up in a certain area where dopamine is produced, and that's what keeps it going. So it's a risky proposition. The third thing I would say, it's safer in people who are older. If you're over 25, marijuana is clearly safer than it is for those under 25 because the brain is still developing. The developing brain is very, very, very sensitive to drugs like marijuana. It specifically causes problems. So if a person is older, now let me say on the other hand, people who are very old, those that are over 80 or over 65, will have more problems with marijuana again. And some of the use among the seniors is increasing, causing falls, causing dizziness, causing other problems. So, it can be used safely, but it's a very risky assumption to believe that you can use it safely or that I can use it safely. It's very risky. It's almost like someone saying, can you drive 90 miles an hour safely? Well, you might get away with it, but you might not. It's that scary.
Not if Detective Reed has anything to do with it.
Right.
All right. Our next question for all speakers is, what healthy alternatives exist to marijuana and general drug use?
Well, can you repeat that again? I'm sorry, I missed some of that.
Certainly. What healthy alternatives exist to marijuana and general drug usage?
Rob, what would you say to that? Because you have a lot of experience there.
For me, healthier alternatives, therapy, at least for me. So that was trauma from childhood, mental illness, prescribed medication, running, going to the gym, going for walks, reading, you know, and hanging out with friends that don't use or don't make it their whole life. So for me, that's what I would think of.
Yeah, I think Rob nailed it when he said things that are constructive. And I like to view it as things that you would tell your little sister or your little brother or somebody you loved. What would you tell them? That you would tell them not to, you would tell them, well, maybe study in school, maybe exercise, maybe be on a better diet, maybe watch the things that you know are good. Why not, if you're going to tell that to somebody else, why not say that to yourself? You deserve to say that to yourself. You deserve to be your best friend, your own best friend. And think of it in that terms. If you become your own best friend, if you give yourself the advice you would give to someone you really cared about, my guess is you'll find some pretty healthy alternatives.
Another thing that I've seen is it's important if you're trying to stay away from marijuana or another certain type of drug to unfortunately you would have to remove yourself from whatever group that you may have been around in the past. Unfortunately, I've seen people in the past try to stop using marijuana and other drugs, but they're still around that group. And if you're around it, eventually you're going to go back to it. So try to separate yourself from them and explain them that you're what you're trying to do, and look at other things like Rob and Dr. Avery said to separate yourself from them. Alternatively, there is no other drug that would be better than marijuana or even going to alcohol because there's issues with alcohol there too. So separating yourself from those people and trying to do things active in your life and positive will be a better outcome.
To build on what Detective Reed said is, if you find friends that want the best for you, and there's some pretty good studies that show that people who are active in their faith communities are much less likely to use drugs and to be addicted to them. So if there's a faith community that you can identify with and become involved with, that can be a very healthy alternative in general.
Okay, we have a few more questions. I'm going to try and move through these quickly before we run out of time. For Detective Reed, for nicotine products, youth may get a slap on the wrist if caught. What are the legal ramifications for youth in possession of marijuana?
So for that, majority of the crimes or charges for juveniles, if they're not majorly serious, are like the person said, a slap on the wrist. A lot of times what our juvenile system does, which is separate than our criminal and circuit court, juvenile court tries to look at other alternatives and try to maybe put them in some type of youth center or some other program instead of charging the juvenile for a possession of marijuana, if that's their first or second offense. If it's multiple times, then they may have to look at other alternatives legally, but the first time is other alternatives and not trying to charge them. It's more of helping them out in those situations.
Thank you. Okay, here. And I think this is for Dr. Avery. Were people already suicidal and the marijuana increased the ideation, or were they suicidal because of marijuana?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would probably be both. I have a neighbor who told me he went skiing. He's in his 60s. He went skiing in Colorado, and him and his buddies got some gummy bears. And he tells the story to me of how he was reading my book, and he said, "Jim, I got to tell you a story I never told my wife." He took some of these gummy bears, and next thing you know, he wanted to throw himself off the banister at the ski lodge where they were. And he never was suicidal in the past, had no issues. So but I think on the other hand, it does exacerbate depression, does make social anxiety worse in many people. So I think it's a combination of both. Part of the issue is the paranoia. Paranoia, is that feeling that everybody is after me or people are looking at me weird. And that can lead to an attempt to escape. An escape might end up being jumping off a bridge or jumping off a balcony. Um, so I think you have to be, it's probably a combination of the question you asked.
Also with that, if I could say something, what
Mhm.
Dr. Avery said, with edibles and other things like THC, vaping, some of those edibles may have higher concentrates of THC oil in them, which could affect you a lot more seriously than smoking. I've seen THC vapes with THC oil up to 70, 80, even some 90% THC oil in them. So that's a stronger effect on the body, which could bring out other issues and complications.
Yeah, Detective Reed, that's a great point. Really, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it in my talk also, edibles are far more dangerous because it's so easy to pop a couple gummy bears. Virginia Commonwealth University collected gummy bears that were being sold, even ones that said only CBD, and they were laced with all kinds of stuff, fentanyl. It just was unbelievable, even things like rat poison, etc. There's no regulations on these things. And so you really are taking a big risk when you use edibles. I would strongly encourage people, if you're going to use marijuana, do not use edibles. You just do not know what you're getting. It's very unstable and very variable. And just look at that Virginia Commonwealth study, and it will shock you to realize what is listed is often not what's in it.
Okay, Liddell, it looks like we have about 3 minutes left. Are you ready to wrap up?
Yes, ma'am. So thank you again to all the panelists that we had. Thank you for all the questions that the participants had in tonight's session. Remember to leave your name if you do want the volunteer credit for tonight in the question and answer, and we'll get that emailed out to you as well. And if you would like to join YCAT Coalition, which is the Youth Community Action Team, please visit our website at ycatcoalition.com, or you can send an email to ycatcoalition@gmail.com. We are always looking for new members to have a safe and healthy Virginia Beach. So thank you once again for your experiences, expertise, and knowledge, sharing those things with us. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.